Hey everyone and welcome back. This is a treasure token, but it's more like a food token. They gifted me at the recent Paupergeddon in Milan. And thank you very much, Lega Pauper Abruzzo. They also gifted me a bottle of Vincotto, Pauper, Pauper wine basically. Vincotto is a kind of liquor made in Italy. From the wine, I mean. And they also gifted me some biscuits that usually eat with this kind of sweet wine. Thank you very much. We are talking about the recent top 8 2026 players and the metagame. So after 8 round of Swiss, they didn't play the top 8, but they split it. So these results were actually the results at the end of the Swiss. But anyway, X-Tron, Dimir Control, Goblin Combo, is at first, Dimir first, and 2 copies of Jeskai Ephemerate and 1 single copy of Flickertron are the deck that we are able to see in the top 8. The metagame was pretty Italian because you usually don't find decks like Jeskai Ephemerate on Magical Line. Cleansing Wildfire and Jeskai Ephemerate aren't really played on Magical Line right now, but Italian players usually really like decks like Jeskai or Boros and Affinity. Usually Italian players are really they really like control decks. Another example is that, for example, Dimir Monarch, which is a Dimir control deck with 4 copies of Throne of Black Rose and 4 copies of Snuff Out. But Jeskai Ephemerate and Dimir Monarch are probably well enough played in Italy thanks to the work of Eisen01, because Eisen01, Mirko Ciabatta, is an Italian player and a content creator, and probably is the most known content creator both in Italy and both globally. Also, if you want to know more about these 2 decks, just go to Eisen01 channel on YouTube. I recommend it. Anyway, the metagame was similar to the competitive Magical Line metagame, at least regarding the Pauper challenges. So it's not surprising that Boros and Affinity were the 2 most played decks. But as I already said, Jeskai seems kind of weird compared to the online metagame. Mostly because I don't really recommend you to play a control deck in a paper tournament. I think that playing control is easier on Magical Line since you don't really need to you are freer to take all your time to think about the plays and how to approach your opponent deck. On tabletop Magic, playing control seems kind of harder because you often need to win the first game, because probably you are not able to play 3 games with a slow control deck. But anyway, as I already said, Italians really like control decks. X-Tron, which is the most recent version of Tron, is a combo deck that has already sprayed on both Magical Line and Italy. It's not surprising that we are seeing a lot of copies of X-Tron. It's kind of surprise probably to see a lot of Goblin Combo, because on Magical Line Goblin Combo isn't really played a lot, mostly because on Magical Line Aggro decks and Fairies decks are more played, and Fairies and Aggro strategies are usually well positioned against combo decks in form of Goblin Combo, for the simple reason that okay, well, Goblin Combo can win on turn 3 or turn 4, but the current deck lists are more focused on getting card advantage from Deadly Dispute and Equal Wellspring, so for because most of the Pauper metagame is composed by interactive decks, and for that reason Mogwarts or Goblin Combo seems kind of well positioned in a metagame filled with interactive decks like Boros, Affinity or Jeskai. It's kind of bad to see so many elves in the metagame, since Makeshift Munitions and Crackland Shaman are probably the two most played red spells, and they can also be seen in the main deck. I'm talking about both Affinity and both Boros Metacraft. Well, a lot of deck lists of Boros aren't really playing Crackland Shaman, but I do really recommend it to you if you want to play Boros, because Elves is not a favorable matchup for Boros, even if you have Makeshift Munitions and a lot of interactive spells. That's because Elves can play Distant Melody and Hydroblast, and you are basically bad positioned against those two cards when you are playing a fair deck. There are obviously a lot of first decks, since Dimir Freeze was the second most played deck, so it's not surprising to see 2 copies of first in the top 8. I played at that event. It's at Service Familiar, and sadly I didn't really went real well because I got a lame 2-3 score and then I dropped it. Anyway, I think that my choice was correct, since my second choice for the Paupergeddon was actually Monobrian Stumpy, and if Burst and Affinity are the 2 most played decks, probably Stumpy is very great, since you aren't really well positioned against Crackland Shaman. I think that Stumpy is great against Jeskai and Fairies. Yes, Jeskai, Ephemerate, and it's that Fairies can play Fury Cannon, but if they don't see Fury Cannon, they usually are bad decks against Stumpy. I think the only deck that I'm kind of surprised to see in this tournament is it's a Blitz or Kill Fiend. That was a nice choice for those 2 players that played Izzet Fiend, but it doesn't seem a great deck when all the black deck are playing Snuff Out. Oh well, anyway, we are going to see the deck list. So Mazzola, the Extron, isn't really different from the stock list. If I remember correctly, he copied the sample list. Deck is a combo deck. Its main gameplay is to get the 3 Urza lands, just to get the mana ramp, and then just draw cards. Your win condition is can be a Golden Foundry or a Cheese Razor. But if you are facing an aggressive deck in form of, for example, Burn or Stumpy or Affinity or Boros, you can play a Fangre Marauder or a Weather the Storm to get some time. You can also play Scattershot, which is really great against Fairies. Basically, the win condition with Foundry and Erasure is something like I play a Foundry Inspector. Now my artifact spells cost 1 less to cast, so Conjurer's Bubble costs 0, and then you loop 2 copies of Conjurer's Bubble and generate an Infinite Storm, Conjurer's Bubble is something like tap, put one card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, then draw a card. So with just 2 copies of Conjurer's Bubble and Golem Foundry, Foundry Inspector, you have a loop. The combo is kind of cool, but I think I will never stream this deck because it's kind of lame to watch. I mean, if you like the deck, can be fun because you are a straightforward combo deck, but you can also be flexible thanks to the card advantage and thanks to mystical teaching. Probably doesn't seem really great to watch someone playing it. Goblin Combo isn't really different from the stock list. If I remember correctly, Simonetta copied Amuda's list. The only thing that I want to you to take a look is the main deck, Masked Vandal, which seems kind of necessary when Makeshift Munitions is main deck in any Boros or Affinity deck list. You can also sacrifice it with Dispute or Crackling Shaman and then bring it back with an art if you need to destroy another artifact or enchantment. The combo deck basically relying on Guild Prospector, Putrid Goblin and First Elf class to generate an infinite amount of red mana. Then with that amount of red mana you can deal an infinite damage with Makeshift Munitions or Floating Wake Invoker. Another cool part of the deck is that all your combo pieces, excluding First Elf class, you can tutor it with Goblin Metron, and you can also play Shred Memory to fetch First Elf class, Putrid Goblin, Munitions, or even Battle Dispute. I think that Gorilla Shaman in the sideboard is pretty useless because you don't really need to destroy Affinity artifact lands, since Affinity also is playing the Modern Horizon 2 dual lands that are obviously indestructible. Anyway, the deck is solid and I can recommend it to you. Then we take a look at Is It Furious. It's not really surprising as a deck list. Okay, there's just the singleton copy of Spell Pierce. Oh, no. Actually, having 6 copies of six ninjas is pretty weird. Usually they play at maximum for ninja affinity powers. Probably they just wanted to be more aggressive and relying less on Monarch since they don't have Snuff Out. Having accumulated knowledge or frantic inventory is still another weird thing. Probably Is It Furious is just a first deck which is well positioned against ephemerate control decks because they have more card advantage. They prefer to not rely on Gurmag Angler as a gameplay, so they don't really have a great beatdown without Angler, so they are relying on having more ninjas and less monarchs. It's also surprising to see a Needs at First deck in top 8 where the metagame was filled with Boros and Affinity. Probably they were able to not face so many of them, or maybe they just won against all of them. Deck is probably playing the stock list. I don't see anything weird, but I'm surprised from not seeing at least 2 copies of Stormbound Geist. Geist used to be one of the best cards in Affinity in various mirror match and also against Boros. Maybe they just want to rely more on Monarch and Ninjas right now. The other first deck is a Dimmer Forest deck, and you can see as something weird that they aren't playing 4 copies of Snuff Out. but is kind of good that they were playing 3 copies of Suffocating Fumes since Boros Monarch started playing again Cool Doctor Board, and Suffocating Fumes seems just good against Cool Doctor Board. Then we have Jeskai Ephemerate. If I remember correctly, Mengucci and Rea tested the deck with Eisen 01. So, as I already said, if you want to learn more or to hear more about Jeskai Ephemerate, just go watch the last video of Eisen 01 in his YouTube channel. Deck is not really surprising, except for the 4 copies of Fire and Ice. I guess that's just a meta call against Furries. All the deck seems to be the usual stock list. The second copy of Jeskai Ephemerate seems kind of prepared against Affinity, because they were playing a singleton copy of Test main deck. It's not bad as a choice, since something like half of the metagame is playing Artifact Lands. I mean, Boros is playing Artifact Lands, that's 20% of the metagame. Affinity, Artifact Lands, another 10%, and then we have Jeskai Ephemerate. Something like 14% of the metagame was playing Artifact Lands. Deck is also playing 1 copy of Towcast. I think Towcast is great in Jeskai, because I was playing Towcast instead of the Monarch for a lot of time. But having only 1 copy with only 2 copies of Seat of Synod seems not really solid. Anyway, both Monarch and Towcast are great at the right spot, so I guess the player just didn't want to draw too many copies of them. It's weird to see the second copy of Palace Sentinel and only 1 singleton copy of Dignitary in their sideboard. I guess they weren't expecting aggressive decks that were great the Fear Cannonade. The current metagame seems more focused on decks weak to Fear Cannonade or just not aggressive decks. For example, Affinity or Affinity that aren't really against them. Fear Cannonade doesn't really do anything. I mean, seems kind of weird for them to playing both Light of Hope and Dawnbringer Cleric in the sideboard, since both of them do the exactly same thing basically, because you usually bring Dawnbringer Cleric and Light of Hope against enchantment decks or burn decks. I guess they just wanted to have more flexibility. Then we have the singleton copy of Tormod Script, but in my opinion, Tormod Script is a card that you want to play against a graveyard decks in form, for example, of Cycling Storm. You don't really want, in my opinion, to play Tormod Script in the mirror match, since you already have Artifact Lands. In the mirror match, they usually bring in Dust to Dust. So if you play, for example, a turn 1 Artifact Lands and turn 2 non-artifact lands, but you land a Tormod Script, it's obvious that they can target both your crypt and land with Dust. Anyway, you are not forced to play Tormod Script in early game, since it doesn't cost mana. But I don't really see it as a necessary card in the mirror match. Usually the mirror match you win it when you have enough copies of Drifter or Ephemerate or an early game Monarch. So for that reason, trying to to exile their graveyard in response to an Ardent Elementalist or an Ephemerate isn't really great, because they usually already get the card advantage by the spell they cast. And for that reason, I don't like Relic of Progenitors or Trauma Script in this kind of control decks. Not the last deck list, but the last Tron deck we are seeing in this video is Flicker Tron. It doesn't really. Also, this list doesn't really seem anything weird. I mean, it's Flicker Tron with Equal Wellspring and Deadly Dispute. But it isn't really anything new, since someone already tried Dispute and Equal Wellspring in Tron. Seems weird to see Flicker Tron in a top 8, especially since there are a lot of GSK Ephemerate. Maybe they haven't faced one, or maybe they just have one against them, since they only play 4 copies of Cleansing Wildfire. Anyway, Equal Wellspring and Deadly Dispute are great also in Flicker Tron. So this kind of Flicker Tron is cutting the 4 copies of Impulse and aren't playing any Sigil Oracle just to play Equal Wellspring and Deadly Dispute. They're also playing 3 copies of Golden Egg and 3 copies of Network Terminal as a substitute to both Prophetic Prism and Bonders Ornament. They're splitting Expedition Map with a singleton copy of Crop Rotation. That's because being able to fetch Crop Rotation with Mystical Teaching is still a great play. I'm not really a fan of playing only 1 copy of Ghostly Flicker with 7 rocks, ATB rocks. But if you already played a Dispute on an Equal Wellspring or a Golden Egg, probably Flicker doesn't do anything. In my opinion, you can also try to not play it, or if you want to play maybe Rolling Thunder or Lightning Bolt. But anyway, especially since Prophetic Prism got the ban, the mana is still a problem in this deck, so probably it's just better to not rely too much on off-color spells like Rolling Thunder. In sideboard, we are still able to see a lot of red spells and also Stonehold Dignitary. I think the deck is well positioned against Affinity if you are able to land a Fangry Marauder in early game, and Affinity was also always weak to Ephemerate. But in 2022, after banning both Prism and Ornament, seems still surprising for me to be able to see Flicker Tron in a top 8. The last list is Dimir Monarch. Dimir Monarch basically is a Dimir control deck. Someone said that having only 3 copies of Gurmag Angler as a finisher makes the deck weak, but I think that the real finisher in this deck is Monarch. I mean, when you are playing a control deck, you don't really care a lot of how you plan to win the game, because if you are able to land your card advantage spell or your Master Animal spell in another format, and then you are able to draw enough answers to your opponent decks, well, they can also kill all your Gurmag Angler. You can still win with Augur of Bolas and Thorn of the Black Rose beatdown. I mean, you are not killing your opponent in 4 turns, you're taking 10 turns or more. Well, that's not a problem if my opponent doesn't have any cards in hand and I draw 2 or more cards per turn. Compared to just Ephemerate or Azorius Familiar, this kind of control decks to me seems more similar to the control decks that are played in Legacy or in Modern, since they aren't really relying too much on card advantage, but they are relying more on the answers. They're playing a lot of counter spells and a lot of removal spells. Their card advantage is just 4 copies of Monarch and 1 copy of Teachings. They are also playing 4 copies of Agropolas, but I think you can consider Agropolas as something like a Ponder with extra steps. Okay, you are putting a creature on the battlefield, which is great because it's a great blocker for any ninja or Natal Sentinel, but Agropolas doesn't really generate a lot of card advantage, especially in a format where, which is defined by cards like Toolcast or Deadly Dispute or Ephemerate. So Agropolas is still a great card, but compared to other Pauper engines, the card doesn't really generate a lot of card advantage. Obviously, in a control or a control deck, or in a deck that is trying to stop the opponent from going to spread on the battlefield, too wide on the battlefield, is great. Is also great with Brainstorm, for example, with Brainstorm, and it's also great with Snuff Out, which is a free spell. But I think that the deck is more relying on Thorn of the Black Rose and Brainstorm when it comes to card advantage. I wanted to say Brainstorm because probably is exactly in this kind of decks that blue Pauper decks are similar to Legacy decks, because here Brainstorm can truly generate card advantage by shuffling the dead cards. Mana base, the mana base can be weird for a lot of you because they aren't playing the Dimir Bounce land, but they are playing 4 copies of Ash Barrens and only 2 copies of Ice Journal and a singleton copy of Lonely Sandbar. Seems weird also for me, because not having a bounce land with a cycle land, I mean, you aren't really playing mono black, even if you have Snuff Out and the Monarch, but I guess that having a cycle land in late game when you are just trying to draw more cards is great. The sideboard is well prepared to face Affinity also, because they were playing 3 copies of Annual, 3 copies of Hydroblast, and also 3 copies of Nihil Spellbomb and another copy of Depth of the Chemi. Depth of the Chemi is great here because you can exile cards like Stormbrand Geist or Mirror Enforcer, preventing your opponent to bring them back with cards like Radiant Fountain, for example. It costs a lot of mana, but since you have cards like Snuff Out and you are also a control deck, you aren't really worried by a singleton 3 mana removal spells. Right, I think we talked about this deck a lot, so thank you for watching, and I remember you that you can use the coupon code Adepto5 on my sponsor site to get a 5% discount on your order. Anyway, thank you for watching and see you later on the next video.